For as long as the game has existed, an arms race has raged continuously in the community of Blackhawk Rescue Mission 5. To create the most powerful, the largest, the best, to be the most capable, the most efficient, the strongest. This is the story of factions in Blackhawk Rescue Mission 5. The concept of factions is not something that was born in BRM 5. It has practically existed since the dawn of online gaming. Yet, there's something intriguing about the history of factions in this game. The people, the experiences, and the drives. What makes people want to join factions? What makes people want to create them? It's something that's been on my mind, and as we approach the 5th year of BRM 5 being up on Roblox, I chose to indulge myself into one of the most influential parts of the community. I've searched records, obtained testimonies from several people in the faction community, both old and new, to try and create the most faithful recounting and analysis of factions in BRM 5. Creating this project, I wish to answer questions regarding factions and their history, and try to demonstrate why this pillar of the community is so vital to the longevity of this game. There are stories of camaraderie, conflict, and legacy that are littered when you look back upon this game's history. Forgotten empires and long-lasting memories. You can find it all here. To say that history is beautiful is an understatement. You could never talk enough about it. There are countless stories, people, and experiences that paint on a canvas, which is the history of this game, only to create an artwork so large that it would be impossible to see its full magnitude. The record of early factions in BRM 5 seems almost non-existent. A search through YouTube shows very few results for faction-related content from that era. Out of the 4 titans of the faction space that a source had mentioned to me, the only footage that I could find was of the faction Kinsofcom. According to some sources, they were stated to be the largest at the time, and I was intrigued. Being able to retain such a high member count at that time had to mean something. What was the experience like? Were people in it for the fun of it? These questions would be left unanswered for me, as I could not find people who could testify about their experience in Kinsofcom. Other titans of the era, Spetsnaz Organization, 10th Special Forces Group, 22nd Regiment British SAS, now BAF, never seemed to have been able to archive their experiences during that era. Unfortunately for those who were in these groups, their experiences seem to have been lost to time. Until I managed to get a breakthrough. I was approached by a member of the 3rd Special Forces Battalion, Svarog, and was informed that Zikrat, their leader, who I believed I was on bad terms with, was open to discuss his experiences in the BRM 5 faction scene. Mysterious Zikrat, the one responsible for opening the faction experience to the Russian community of BRM 5. Former leader of Amon in Spetsnaz Organization, he has continued to expand the Russian community of BRM 5 through the founding of Rusov, now 3rd Special Forces Battalion, Svarog.
Well, it was really scary for me to find a faction to join due to the language barrier, so I was looking specifically for a Russian group, and yeah, that was the Spetsnaz Organization. Because it was one of the biggest factions along with BAF back then. And just imagine my disappointment after I found out that I was the only Russian there, in a Russian-based faction.
When talking to Zikrat, not only did I obtain a perspective of a faction player from the Aftermath era, but also the perspective of a pioneer. As the first Russian Spetsnaz organization, his experience has more differences than similarities to others of that era. During a time where factions primarily favored English, Zikrat was treated as the special one, something that he states saddened him. This situation led him to pursue recruiting Russian members into SO, consequently leading to the formation of Amon, a division within SO for Russians. The formation of Oman marks a significant milestone in the history of Burn 5 factions, as through continued activity and devotion to the faction, the Russian-speaking community of SO grew, and thus Spetsnaz organization, Oman, and Ziggurat became pioneers in the expansion of language support in factions, something that has continued to expand as the game grew in popularity. And with this crowning achievement, we close the book on Aftermath-era factions, and move on to the Daybreak and Nightfall eras. As we move into what some call the golden age of factions, we see more footage prop up. Current titans like Blackout made their debut during this time. Along with that, forgotten titans such as the SASR and Dauntless were in their prime. Creating the foundations for the modern era of factions, these titans were pioneers in developing concepts that we consider common use today. According to my source, the SASR was the first in creating much of the modern Discord-related implements, such as adding emojis to channel names, and having cleaner server layouts. Dauntless and another PMC group named Myriad expanded on the PMC genre in different ways during this time. According to some sources, Myriad was considered one of the more realistic PMCs. Aside from big genre developments, it seems like the move away from zombies seemed to have strengthened the Milsim aspects of the game and allowed factions to be able to form more cohesive and grounded stories without having to rely too much on the zombies aspect of the game. On the other end of the field, Blackout began to truly establish itself as the superpower of the faction community. Built mainly around a casual experience, its numbers grew astronomically during this time. Yet, after the development of factions such as Blackout, the Golden Age started to wane, and negative outcomes for the faction community were seen. Effects which first showed signs in Nightfall, and have even led up to today. Before discussing the topic of the Gilded Age, it's important to preface with one of the biggest issues that plagued the faction community after the massive popularization of certain factions. Copycats. The creation and success of Blackout eventually led to the creation of countless copycat factions, which were nearly identical to how Blackout operated. Many claim that these factions led to the dilution of quality of factions at the time, an effect that is still seen today. Yet, in the grand scheme of things, copycats seem to be harmless. Most did not see much growth, as one of the biggest factors that I've seen being thrown around for faction growth is uniqueness, having that something special for your faction. It's something that let Dauntless grow past the title of being another Blackout copycat. But it's a shame that Dauntless was the only one to truly escape that moniker.
So yeah, gilded means covered in a thin layer of gold, and as the metaphor goes, it's also rotten on the inside. So golden on the outside, kind of bad on the inside. And here it references nostalgia.
The Gilded Age was a term used a lot by my buddy Slug. Whenever we look back upon faction experiences, he would throw that term around. It really did encapsulate what the faction scene was back then. For this project, my main focus was on the periods of Nightfall and Viper in BRM5's history. The conditions that this period of time created led to many factors which contributed to the Gilded Age. Putting my buddy, during Nightfall and Viper, the game was in a very early development stage as opposed to what it is now. There was enough customization, not enough things to do in the game, and the graphics were not too great at the time. Everything led to BRM5 being treated as just another game on Roblox, an experience made for kids. This led factions of that time to be mostly populated by young teenagers. The younger demographic reflected what factions were at the time. The experience was simpler, it was about the community, and messing around and just having a good time. That was the energy that factions had back then. And this is where in my research I see a Titan appear. An encompassing force of all the values listed above. Division H. SKK Bear, or Bear, were a member of Division H, Sentinel Rangers, and a founding member of Redwood Militia. All these factions are long gone now. He's currently embedded within Echelon Hank as a logistics officer. Him, along with other Echelon Hank members, have helped me piece together the history of the legendary Division H. As for running factions, I never really intended to run any in the first place, but a certain faction really changed my life. Division H. That faction was the one faction that I really resonated with. It stood out for me from the other factions at the time as the one that existed to do shits and giggles with others. The fun and games faction. From my research and what I recall from the time, Division H was truly an interesting place as an outsider, and even more as an insider. Nobody took anything seriously, and the way they conducted themselves was in a relaxed manner. An enjoyable time for anyone within. I was never in Division H, so I could never claim how good it was. But whenever people recounted their experience in Division H, it was always with a positive look on it. The friendships made, the experiences had. Yet, looking back on Viper through just Division H's lens is somewhat deceiving, as under that veil of fun that factions brought, the scene of faction politics led to some of the most sinister actions of that era. Hank Gimbletto, or Hank, current leader of Echelon Hank, and former member of Division H. The first testimony that I managed to obtain whilst researching for this project. Much of what he's had to say was incredibly valuable for beginning my writing for this video. The first faction I joined was Division H back in 2020. A few of the veterans should remember it. It was a faction known for advertising themselves as morons and not taking things seriously. It was there where I got my first introduction towards the usual goings of faction work. The incessant drama, the really weird politics that ran there, and most importantly, the people that you had to deal with. He was right. Drama, politics, and people. Those were, and still are, big factors in factions. Yet, faction politics were perhaps the most volatile and aggressive back in Viper. Small disagreements or petty arguments led to what we call faction wars. Faction wars at its core is a fight between two factions. It can be in-game, as many factions choose to do, leading to factions establishing superiority through winning in PvP matches. And that would have been a fun time. It was an interesting break from the usual faction operations where you were fighting AI. Unfortunately for some people, faction wars were more than just fighting in-game.
So, just to avoid getting stuck in monotony and bring some fresh feelings in the routine, faction leaders are searching for some side activities like joint operations, which certainly adds some variety to a faction's life. However, just to get even more excitement, some factions begin conflicts with each other and sometimes even go to war. And as you may know, all the means are valid in any war, and these so-called wars reveal perhaps both the most interesting but the most disgusting side of this game. Honestly, it would be much easier to live if all the conflicts in faction community were resolved through PvP matches. But however, over time, the tools of fighting have really changed. You can surely act in extremely aggressive way and nuke the opponent's server, as it happened with SASR and some small Russian groups not so long time ago, but you would have all the chances to get the faction blacklisted from the community. And that's why the information can be described as the most elegant and effective way to destroy your opponent. If some faction is interested in exposing its enemy, it forms up a special group or so-called spy agency, which goal is requiring both charisma and patience. Just imagine that people join some random groups, rank up, or even eventually take in HR positions, so they would gain as much information as possible and then report it to their commander. I personally cannot speak for all the factions that exist at this moment, but I can definitely say that there were such agencies in Spetsnaz organization, which infiltrated in old German KSK faction.
Spy agencies. The infiltration of factions from the inside. It's almost like a movie. As Zikrat described, a war between factions doesn't mean just fighting in game. It means to completely demoralize the enemy. During my research, I was able to obtain documents from Blackout's Task Force Black, its former intelligence agency. Infamous for their operations, getting my hands on these documents was a goldmine. Reading the documents, it's easy to deduce that their official goal was to create detailed intelligence files on their enemies and allies. Unofficially though, their job was to tear factions apart from the inside. To infiltrate, search, and destroy. Task Force Black was involved in the demoralization of enemies through psychological operations, so that when Blackout faced its enemies, they would be deprived of pride. To win at all costs. This is what absolute victory means to those who are in the faction business. It's not just to win in a game, it's to achieve total dominance over your enemy, to siphon its members, to turn them into husks, to strike at the heart of a faction and stop it from beating. Those who know the story of Task Force Black are well aware of its victims, and to know if those victims will ever get justice is unknown. As far as we are aware, the existence of so-called spy agencies are unknown in current times. As much as we may wish for a force like Task Force Black to be gone for good, these agencies are far too great of assets to disband after scandals like this. Factions must keep up their intelligence operations. To know what your enemy and your ally is up to is crucial in today's faction operations. We've explored how factions destroy other factions, but now we must turn to look at how a faction's members feel after their factions are destroyed. The destruction of a faction from the inside, a complete deletion of a faction from existence, a true total victory for the opponent. It's devastating. Receiving several testimonies, people know about their factions being quote-unquote nuked, absolutely decimated. It truly is a finalizing act for a faction, completely demoralizing whoever manages the faction. Its members removed, it leaves the owner holding a corpse. One testimony in particular completely broke me. It talks about the history of Myriad for the first half, only to make a turn to talk about its destruction for the other half. Reading the testimony, there was truly nothing for me to say. To destroy someone's hard work, to destroy a community. Jinx had deleted Myriad. I remember Zach telling me it was because of some difference that he nuked all of Myriad's main server. We in MSFCom decided to lock down our server and keep it. We didn't know what to do, we just wanted to hold on to what we had left. We eventually decided to retire the server. After all, without Myriad and Zek, we didn't feel whole. For some disagreement, to completely eradicate a server. The nuking of factions is possibly the worst action an enemy, either external or internal, can do. It's unfortunate that victims of such actions cannot find justice. Their only course of action is to find a new community that will take them up, or to leave the game entirely. Those who do seem to be broken, their community gone, and perhaps leaving is for the best, to never have to experience this once again. Before moving into Resurgence and current faction history, it's important to touch up on one of the most important events in Viper's history. A year of silence. A year without updates. And so factions fell. With the lack of content being added to the game, there was no reason to keep playing. There was nothing new to do in the game. It was terrible. Many factions just cracked under pressure or went into deep hibernation. The update drought was perhaps the most memorable thing about Viper for players who were actually there. But perhaps more than asking what happened to factions during the update drought, it's more important to talk about what factions did during this time. Those who held onto the game were the ones who kept up the player numbers during such a dark time. While perhaps factions don't make up the majority of the player base, it's important to understand that they make up a significant portion of it. And at a time where motivation was greatly needed for developers, I think that factions were able to contribute significantly by keeping numbers up. And even if I'm wrong, I think the feeling of participating and helping in something greater is a feeling that people can be content with. Resurgence was possibly the most revolutionary time for factions, or at least had the opportunity to be the most revolutionary. To begin with the biggest improvements since Viper, RG. With release 6.1.2, players and factions obtained access to the real-time game editor, something that turned BRM5 into a sandbox. It quickly became the most powerful tool at a faction's disposal. RG had finally allowed factions to create their own locations and break from the boredom of raiding the default compounds. Those who mastered RG became valuable assets to factions. For 3 years, people had wanted to be able to create custom scenarios, and now they had it. RG has now become a requirement to any faction wanting to truly improve the user experience. It's become a lifesaver for factions, finally bringing in a breath of fresh air, being able to mold the map to your liking. With custom locations and enemy placement, it has really led to a lot of factions being able to retain their members and activity levels. Though there are several criticisms leveled against RGE, the overall experience I've heard is positive. A lot of concepts within factions could have never evolved without the existence of RGE, which leads me to my next point. With Resurgence, we've seen two things happen: the fall of quote-unquote joke factions and the rise of Milsim factions. Perhaps as Resurgence brought in greater features to be able to act as real Roblox special forces, the average age of the player base increased. With older teenagers finding Bjorn 5 no longer a game for kids, Resurgence strengthened the Milsim aspects for the game, leading to people taking the game more seriously. People didn't just want to mess around in the game, but instead wanted to be organized, be efficient, and win. To some veterans, having an experience like Division H and Resurgence would be nice, but the switch to Milsim gameplay was inevitable with the current direction the developers wish for the game to go towards. But casual factions still exist. While not relaxed as Division H, the spirit somewhat lives on, as casual factions become communities where people interact in a relaxed and lighthearted manner. Having experienced operations in both Milsim and casual factions, I can say that I'm glad that the casual experience is still an option, as many players may not be too open to the idea of strict groups. But it's also important to note that Milsim groups are also a great way to improve knowledge on real combat skills, where infantry tactics and squad level movements are emphasized, and lead to people developing and improving their combat effectiveness. Depending on the person, either group could be a fun way to enjoy Bjorn 5, and it's great that the community still has choices when it comes to factions. Resurgence has managed to propel some incredible faction variety, with several different genres being able to take off recently. Lore-based factions like Noble 7 and Task Force 1949, or militia-based factions like RPM, PAR, or RIA. Alongside that, Milsim factions such as FSRR, 13 Special Missions Unit, Juno Group, and Joint Task Force Kiryu are also some pretty nice factions. And choices don't just come with what kind of faction a player is looking for. The expansion of Bjorn 5 factions to foreign languages and people has become much more widespread as recent. Bjorn 5 was already international since Aftermath, but much of the player base was from English-speaking countries. Now with Resurgence, we have seen factions from all over the globe prop up, all with their individual ways of operating, and even specific language support. Seeing the game evolve like this and seeing the community truly grow to become as diverse as it now is a very gratifying feeling to many. And I'm glad that for the past 5 years, factions in Bjorn 5 have continuously been able to evolve the way we play and enjoy the game. Without factions, there probably wouldn't be such a continuous player base which supports this game. People come back to this because they've made connections and friendships, all because of some silly LEGO game. I can attest to that, and I'm sure many others can as well. And as we move on to Gen 4, I see that many people I've talked to are hopeful for factions with what the update will bring to the table. Testimonies of people noting that the faction scene in Bjorn 5 is in decay, and there isn't much done to help it get back on its feet. But with Gen 5 on its way, the optimism in many faction players lit up. A new experience for people with improved features and mechanics. Whatever Gen 4 holds for faction players will hopefully be an update full of features that will further expand upon Bjorn 5's gameplay and how we enjoy the game. So, after 5 years, we've gotten here. A journey which took questionable turns and had heavy losses. Learning about the different kinds of factions that have been, learning about how they rose and how they fell, it was an interesting learning experience for me. And to come back to the question posed at the beginning, why do people make factions? It's a question that I probably can't answer yet. There's so much to this, so much that I could explore, and this video is far too short to uncover the true meanings of creating factions. So for now, I hang around factions. I want to see for myself what factions really are and what their meaning truly is. I may not find what I'm looking for, but I still want to try. Anyway, that's what I've come to believe, and that's enough. And to all those who helped me with this video, all your information, opinions, and support was incredibly valuable. So thank you, friends, and I'll see you again. Bjorn 5 factions, groups which evolved so much over these years with so much history. Their presence fills the air in much of the community, and to be proud of all that they have achieved. Collecting these testimonies, I felt the pride that many of these members in this community have, what they've achieved, what they've lost. It's a roller coaster of emotions, but whenever someone looked back on their experiences, it was always with a slight smile on their face. And that, perhaps, may be my conclusion to this. Hey all, Yeen here. I'd like to start off by giving a massive thank you to everybody involved in this project. Those who helped me adjust my script, those who gave me their testimonies about their experiences. This video was incredibly time consuming to make, and I hope that whoever has gotten to this part has enjoyed it. I understand that I've completely omitted parts of faction history here, such as faction hubs like the Renegade Coalition and FactProv, but I felt like that topic was better suited for its own video. I'd also like to apologize for anyone who was deceived by the trailer thinking that it was going to be a full-on Ace Combat Zero parody. But, oh well. That's all for the video, chat. Enjoy the credits.